Next guest became the youngest leader of any political party in the Dáil less than 4 years after entering electoral politics. Since then, she has almost doubled the number of TDs in her party and was the first to endorse Catherine Connolly in her successful run for the Áras. Would you please welcome Holly Cairns? Welcome to the show. 6 weeks back in the Dáil after maternity leave. Are you enjoying being back amongst it all, the cut and the thrust of it?
I am. It was, to be honest, bittersweet, and I think a lot of women who go back to work after maternity leave will find that. I was definitely excited to get back and to get stuck in, but also getting used to being away from the little one is tricky, and politics isn't necessarily designed for women who've just had a baby either, so... Bit of both.
A bit of both. Since you've had your new arrival, Ireland has had a new president. The Social Democrats, the first to endorse Catherine Connolly. You must be delighted with that result.
To say the least. I mean, obviously, you know, we were really proud to endorse Catherine from the beginning. I was lucky enough to get to know her in the previous Dáil, and you know, she always stood out to me as somebody who stood on the right side of important arguments. She had that something special about her as well. You know, when she stood up to speak in the Dáil, she was really softly spoken, but everybody listened. And that's kind of a unique trait. But I would have worked a lot in the first Dáil term on the aftermath of the Commission investigation into mother and baby homes. And that's when I really came to know that she was an incredibly decent politician. She has real integrity. And I think we're all incredibly lucky that she will be our president.
Would you say this is the start of a new era, or, you know, I know there were a lot of spoiled votes in the election, there was a low turnout. Do you think maybe people need to engage a bit more in the political process at the minute?
I think it's really important to acknowledge those spoiled votes, and of course they're not a homogenous group of people either. But there was a lot of people saying they didn't feel represented on the ballot paper.
Were there enough people on the ballot paper?
I clearly not, you know, in that scenario. Now, I think an important thing to note as well is, take Catherine Connolly. She, you know, announced her campaign a long time ago. She was, you know, on the campaign trail for months. None of those candidates who tried to get on the ballot and didn't put that much into it. And it should take a bit of work to get onto our ballot paper for a presidential election, I think. So, you know, I think we should be really open to discussion and conversation about this, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that, because I think we're lucky that we now have a president who will turn up to the Áras like she did for that campaign. She was serious about it. She knew what it took to get on the ballot. She knew what it took to win the election, and that's the type of president that we'll have now. So I think in some ways the process works quite well, but we do need to look at it and always be open to conversation about it, absolutely. But so we have the spoiled vote scenario, and that's really important to look at. But what we also saw, Patrick, was a campaign that I think felt similar to, for example, the marriage equality campaign in Ireland. It felt similar to the Repeal the Eighth campaign, where we saw a whole load of, for example, younger people who maybe hadn't been politically mobilised in the past, who joined Catherine's campaign. And I know, because, you know, having gone through the Repeal campaign and coming out of and getting involved in politics, that that's really important, because it can feel like politics is kind of for somebody else, you know, but politics affects all of us, and we need, you know, more representation, we need more diversity in the Dáil. So to see more people getting involved, getting energised and mobilised involved in politics is so important, and I hope those people will stay involved.
One of the people that this election brought to the fore, Ivan Yates. Ivan Yates was found to have coached Jim Gavin. He also had his comments about smearing the bejesus out of Catherine Connolly. Do you think that there needs to be a declaration of interest going forward, going into campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he should have declared his interest. It's as simple as that. And I think, you know, one of the interesting things about Catherine's campaign was how much she rose above all of those kind of different elements that were going on in the background. And
do you know if she received any media training from a journalist during the campaign?
You would have to ask her, yeah, and I'm not sure.
You don't know?
I don't know if Catherine Connolly had any, none, no.
Have you ever had any media training from a broadcaster?
I'm not from a broadcaster, no. I've had media training once.
it's something that you think needs to be put out in the open a bit more?
Look, any broadcaster should just declare their interest. I think that's just in the interest of the listeners. Everybody should know if there's any kind of a bias. And, particularly with the presidential election campaign like that, it's just extremely important. And, hopefully other people will learn from this going forward. That's all I can say on the matter, I suppose, really.
In the news this week, Simon Harris and immigration. He has said that immigration is too high, the system's not built for the numbers. You have said that he's kind of coming out of the Nigel Farage playbook. He's someone who has had death threats and attacks on his home. Is that responsible, comparing him to Nigel Farage?
I think it's really important that we call out the behaviour from the Taoiseach in recent days, because what we've seen is a very obvious reaction to the result of the presidential election. The government seemed to be in panic mode, and what they're doing is trying to point the finger of blame for their failures elsewhere. And that is not only irresponsible, but in the current climate, when we know things are so fragile, when it's a number of days after the riots outside City West, it's actually reprehensible, because it fans the flames of a very serious and delicate situation. And I think, we saw the riots in Dublin before, and after that, there were children of colour terrified to go to school. We need to think about the reality of what this kind of flame fanning does. I mean, and he needs to take responsibility for that as a leader.
To be fair to him, though, the attack on the IPAS Centre, this week, he has called that a, despicable crime. So he has come out and condemned that.
That is the very least that he could do, is condemn an attack whereby somebody quite literally tried to burn children, including a nearly 3-week-old baby, alive. And what the Taoiseach essentially said was that the number of immigrants, of people coming in, was too high. And in that he included the number of people who come in on work permits. So the Taoiseach is, for one, kind of bending the numbers, because he was talking about the 80% of people who refused, not including that on appeal, 30% of those people get it. So he's kind of fudging the figures, saying that there's too much immigration. But including the people on work permits, he hasn't said, would he like to reduce the number of people working in our healthcare services, in construction to build the thousands of homes that we so desperately need, from the hospitality sector, from meat processing plants. He hasn't said any of those things. All he's trying to do is use, quote unquote, kind of tough on immigration language. And we saw after this outrageous attack on the IPAS Centre where the children were, he was speaking about, the next thing that was like the rush to cabinet. They're talking about charging international protection applicants for accommodation. Now, let's break that down for a second. For one, it can't be legally enforced. Ireland has an obligation to provide accommodation for people. For two, it would actually cost the state money. And for three, if you want somebody to be able to move out of an international protection centre, they have to be able to save up for a deposit. So all they're doing is trying to talk tough on immigration. And I think a really kind of interesting analogy or comparison to this is we saw Mamdani, the recent election of the man in New York, and his speech after he got elected, and he said, New York is a city that is built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and now led by an immigrant. And where is Ireland's positive message for the people who've come here? It is their legal right to do that. Instead, it's the government pointing the finger at them. And this is a trend with this and previous governments, where they promise something, do nothing, and then try to blame somebody else. The latest fall guy is EU red tape. They're constantly looking for something else to blame for their failures, and it's simply not good enough, particularly when the situation is so sensitive.
I mean, he said that, migration is a good thing. I think, the other thing, in terms of the contribution that they've made, he's also said that they make a positive contribution to that, is...
While saying the numbers are too high.
If this is the conversation that we're having, I mean, is that not a good thing that he's given his opinion, that you're given your opinion, and we can kind of have a conversation about it?
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. What we've been calling for and asking for the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach is to make sure that our discussions are based in fact. So fudging figures like that and insinuating that the numbers are too high is simply incorrect. We've seen other members of the Dáil conflating crime with immigration. That is also factually incorrect. There's actually more crime amongst Irish people than there is amongst our immigrant community, and that's just a matter of fact. So it's really important that we talk about it. But what we're constantly saying, Social Democrats in the Dáil, is let's make sure this is based in fact. That's all we're asking.
There are some people who are concerned about immigration. I mean, where do you think that comes from?
I know that there is. And what it comes from is a government inaction. So people often can't even get a GP. You can't access affordable housing. We have over 5,000 homeless children in this country at the moment. And I think there is a really profound disconnect, Patrick, because we're talking about a country that has a GDP per capita that makes us one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And the number of children living in consistent poverty doubled last year. We have, record budget surpluses and threadbare disability services. There's a huge disconnect between where we're at and our actual potential. And what I would say to people is, that is a choice that we have when it comes around to an election, because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have brought us so far, and of course loads of good things have been done. But what they are doing with our health service, with housing policy, with childcare, you name it, is ultimately, and this is their position, they're right of centre both of them are right of centre parties, and their position is to throw these issues up to the gods in the private sector. And then it is out of their controls, it's out of their hands. And then they're scrambling. And that is their ideology. And what we're saying is the wrong decisions got us into these crises, the right ones can get us out. It might sound, it's not radical what we're proposing, but it actually would have a radical impact on people's lives for the state, for the government of the day, to put, build our public services. When we go into an election, when the Social Democrats went to the last election, we said, we're not going to promise massive tax cuts and investment in services. I think people deserve a bit more straight talking. That is what the government have done. What did they do? They deliberately misled us on the housing figures in the lead up to the government. They promised the Occupied Territories Bill. All the talk of a public model of childcare, it's evaporated.
There's a lot of people that are listening to you and listening to the stuff that you're saying and, would support you. And would have loved at the last election that you had gone into government. There's some people that think you were protecting the future of the party rather than actually getting into government and changing people's lives. So before the election, because what we do see is everybody will have experienced this, political parties, politicians promising the sun, moon and stars and then under-delivering. And I think people are really sick and tired of that. So we took a different approach in the lead up to the last general election, whereby we said we had after the general election, though,
so we had our 5 deal
to,
breakers,
okay.
And we said to people, if we can get these 5 things in, because trust me, there's way more than 5 things that we want to get in, but we recognise that no party is in a position to be a majority government. It's about coalitions, that there is going to be compromise, and we want to be really have a pact with the public to say, we'll get these 5 things in. If we can't, we won't go into government. And I think having that straight up conversation with the public is really important, because what we see, and what I was so fed up of with Irish politics before I went into it, is this kind of underestimation of the electorate. Just tell them that during the election and then don't bother doing it afterwards. I think that we deserve better. So that was our approach. We had our 5 deal breakers, and we couldn't get those into the programme for government, so we didn't go into that government. And it wasn't a massive ask. We're talking about the bare minimum here, the accelerated implementation of Sláinte Care, building a public model of childcare, things that a senior ministry for disability, all of these things are achievable. I think it feels very out of reach for us in Ireland to imagine actually having a national health service. We're one of the only countries in Europe that doesn't, and we spend more per capita on health than those countries. So there is another way, but we have to choose it. And I think, the Social Democrats had those 5 deal breakers going into the last election. We've since doubled the size of our parliamentary party. I hope to go into the next election with a lot more deal breakers than that. We really plan to grow and build, because it doesn't have to be this way. Change is possible. But I know we have a huge job work for us. In the lead up to the last election, people all over the country saying, I wish I had a candidate in Sligo, I wish I had a candidate here. I want to say to those people, I hear you. That is our laser focus now as a party. That is what we're working towards and building towards, because the next government, I think Catherine Connolly, her campaign has showed what is possible, but we want to make sure that the next government has the biggest socially democratic influence. So that is, a big job of work for us, but I want to reach people. We need to earn people's trust, and crucially, we need to keep it. I think there's space for a new style of politics.
I want to talk about the Social Democrats in terms of you're pretty much a controversy-free party, and then along comes Owen Hayes with the Palantir shares and the blackface. Do you regret his selection as a candidate?
It was a difficult time for the party, and I know that we'll have loads more difficult times. I think.
Do you regret it though, selecting him?
No, I think the test of any party or any organisation or whatever it is how you deal with situations. There's always going to be difficult situations, and the party acted very swiftly. There was quite a serious sanction for Deputy Hayes, and
what was it?
A suspension of 8 months is nearly unprecedented in terms of party suspensions. He has unequivocally apologised. He donated the increase in share price to charities on the ground in Gaza, and now I believe that he deserves a second chance. And
so you would be supporting him then as a candidate in the next election?
He has an opportunity now to earn people's trust back, and I absolutely support him to do that. I think that he deserves it.
If there is going to be a left-wing government here in Ireland, chances are it'll be led by Sinn Féin and Mary Lou. Would you support, a few supporters in, would you support her for Taoiseach?
For me, it's not about who's in what position, who's the Taoiseach, who's the minister for what. It's about
as the biggest left-wing party, they will ultimately lead a left-wing government, you would think, if it happens. So would you be happy with her as Taoiseach?
It's just not about who's Taoiseach for me. It's about, we would like to see is a left government. We would favour that, absolutely. And what we've always said and what I continue to say now is we'll talk to everybody after the election, and we would talk to people on the left first, because we want to get as many of our policies in as possible. We have much more in common with parties on the left, and we would always ask people to vote left, transfer left.
Okay, so it's not about people, it's not who the Taoiseach is, but if it's Sinn Féin are going to want a border poll within 5 to 10 years. So would you support that?
I think what we need to be really careful of in relation to border polls and anything to do with a united Ireland is to not make the kind of mistakes that were made with Brexit, that we're voting on something that's kind of in the abstract and we don't know what the specifics of it are. So
I mean, the specifics
really
of it are, though, that Sinn Féin, that is their core value, that is what they want. You were talking about your party and, the things that you guys would not go into government unless you got. They're going to want that. Would you support that poll within 5 to 10 years?
We want to see united Ireland. What we think is we need to know what that would look like. And I think the reality is, in the South, we have a lot of work to do in terms of reaching that. We know from polling that's done, people broadly really want to see that. And when they're asked about the different compromises or things that might have to change, that hasn't even been on people's radar down here. So we're very aware that there's a lot of work to be done. And we think that work should start with...
You don't think a united Ireland's on people's radar down here?
Oh, no, I think it's on their radar. I don't think it's on their radar. And what I'm saying is, no, absolutely, sorry. All of the polling suggests that people absolutely want a united Ireland, 100%. What people in the South haven't considered as much is how that might work. For example, would we still have a Stormont? Would we change our emblems? All of these things, I think we have quite a long way to go in terms of getting to that point. And I think if we want to see united Ireland, which I do, the best way to achieve that is to have, for example, citizens' assemblies cross-border to establish what the best way is. And then when we do a poll,
do you think it's
we
possible
know what
within
we're being
5 or 10
polled
years?
on. That I don't know in terms of, setting up a citizens' assembly, making sure that it's extremely thorough and includes unionists and nationalists in the north, as well as the different perspectives in the south. All of those things would take some time. And I think actually a lot of what would help, if you're living in the north, and I know that the NHS is far from perfect, don't get me wrong, the fact that we don't have a national health service down here. I think we have a lot to work on, but what is crucial is that when people are being polled on a border poll, that we know what we'd be voting on. I think that that's actually really important, so everybody can get on board with the same plan rather than a kind of United Ireland in the abstract.
But for them, it's not an abstract thing. They believe that that plan is achievable within 5 to 10 years. Do you think it is?
I honestly don't know. I think it depends on how the next 5 years goes, and that's the truth, you know. I think we would have to know, for example, how would it be governed? Would we still have a Stormont, but the government down here would operate the same as the one in the UK does at the moment? Like, none of those specifics have been ironed out, and I think if you ask people a question without giving them the reality of what they're answering, it opens it up to a lot of misinformation, a lot of presumptions, and I think that could actually hinder us in terms of working towards a united Ireland. So our approach would be very much working towards achieving it, and how long that would take, I think we would only find out when we would start the process in terms of citizens' assemblies and all of the things that I think it would take to get there.
Your career has been in fast forward since everything's gone at a pace since you got into politics. If it goes at the same pace that it's been going, is there a chance that we might see you on the presidential ticket next time round?
No.
No?
No.
What do you think is going to be next for you then, in terms of where you want to be in the next few years?
What I would hope for is that the Social Democrats would be in government. We really want to go into government. We want to affect the kind of changes that we've been campaigning for. We want to implement the policies we've been working on. And we really want to see Ireland reach its potential, I think, in terms of how lucky we are, you know, how prosperous our country is. We have so much potential, and it's right there. There's no need for having the lowest employment rates for disabled people in the EU, for having thousands of people stuck in their childhood bedrooms, to have people, you know, almost reminds me of 2008, the amount of people leaving to go to Australia. You know, we have an enormous potential, and where I'd like to see the Social Democrats is in government and working hard to achieve that.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight. One more time, Holly Cairns, thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come.